نشكر الدكتور أوجال كومار جوش من جامعة قطر. والآن مع كلمة الدكتور داميلولا أولويا من جامعة حمد بن خليفة.
Well, good morning. Thank you to my colleague for the wonderful presentation. I look at these issues from the policy and legal perspective. I think he's given us a very wonderful overview of the role of engineers and technology in green engineering. But at HBKU, Ahmad bin Khalifa University, I teach energy law. And as part of that course, I expose students to renewable energy concepts, especially issues relating to climate change and how we can prepare for climate change through innovative and dynamic design. So I'll probably be sharing some of my perspectives on that today. So I'll give you a very short overview that builds on what my colleague has already given. And I'll talk about why we need to start thinking about climate-proofing buildings, how we can address the impact of climate change on buildings. Then I'll start looking at some of the legal and governance questions relating to how to achieve climate-smart infrastructure in Qatar. And after that, I would sort of summarize some policy lessons that can help us going forward as we think about these issues. Like I normally say, climate change presents both risks and opportunities. And in terms of risk, climate change presents significant risk for this region, arguably more than any other region in the world. And that's because even without climate change, this region is already classified as being arid, meaning that it has attributes of shortage of water, extreme heat. So those are things that climate change could only worsen. And with the rise in extreme weather events in all over the world, it's very clear that the impacts of climate change are already here and that we need to do something to prevent and address those impacts. And like I mentioned, these impacts are even, very worrisome for the region because there are fears that if something innovative is not done, climate change could start leading to the collapse of some of the existing infrastructure. It could start reducing the life expectancy of buildings and what have you. And that's also because at the time many of the existing infrastructure were put in place, climate change wasn't a real threat at the time. But now, with more extreme weather events, we're beginning to see that not only do we need to integrate climate change planning into designs, we actually need to climate-proof some of the existing infrastructure that were designed many years ago. So, and like I mentioned, even without climate change, this is an arid region. It's an arid region. The extreme heat is already there. And imagine if climate change effects, which normally means that there will be extreme heat. Imagine the implications of that for a country like this. So I look at these issues and ask the question, what can we do to prevent some of these predicted impacts of climate change? These are some amateurish pictures that were taken during some of the last, I think this was sometime last year in which there was some rainfall and then it led to flooding. And in taking those pictures, I looked at them and I said, if this rainfall could lead to this, then imagine the implications of climate change, which scientists say would include flooding. So imagine a flooded Qatar due to climate change. So I asked the question, how can we make our buildings ready for the implications or the impact of climate change, which could sort of double what we saw during that rainfall. Well, okay. So to address the implications of climate change, like I said, there is a need to start thinking of climate-proofing both existing infrastructure and then going forward as we construct new projects, even more so now that the country is preparing for the World Cup. It's a shame that some of my slides are not showing, but this is a text from the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which talks about the need for countries to include redesigning their current water, transportation, and energy infrastructure to enhance their resilience and to enhance their adaptive capacity. By the way, the Paris Climate Agreement is the leading legal text on climate change and its impact, and many countries of the world have signed to the Paris Agreement, including Qatar, saying that we commit to address climate change. And a key element of addressing climate change is addressing its implications for infrastructure. So ensuring that infrastructure, both water, transportation, energy infrastructure are upgraded to ensure that they are climate resilient. And also using low carbon and energy efficient materials to replace aging infrastructure. So achieving climate smart infrastructure simply means, designing infrastructure with climate change in the mind. So having climate change at the back of your mind when you're planning new projects, and having climate change at the back of your mind and asking, how can we strengthen infrastructure systems? The World Bank, a recent World Bank study shows that this is going to be an expensive venture. About $90 trillion will be needed to achieve this climate proofing of buildings. And that's why some of my existing work in the field sort of argues for the need for public-private partnership, given the fact that climate proofing buildings will be a very costly venture. Also, there is a need to mobilize engineering expertise, technology, and technical know-how or efficiency that could be found maybe in the private sector as well, to start asking questions about how can we mainstream, integrate climate proofing as a concept in the design of buildings. What then is climate proofing? Climate proofing, according to the United Nations, is the explicit consideration and internalization of the risk and opportunities that climate change scenarios are to bring, and adopting those risks and opportunities in the design, operation, and maintenance of infrastructure. In other words, it simply means integrating climate change risk and opportunities into the design, operation, and management of infrastructure. So this UN study, a very recent one and very comprehensive, talks about the need to identify the risk and opportunities in the risk and opportunities that climate change brings when designing infrastructure. Now, climate change is often painted all over the world as a risk, but it's not just a risk, it's an opportunity as well, because it's an opportunity to redesign existing infrastructure to make them more efficient. It's an opportunity to create green jobs. It's an opportunity to recycle materials more than we would ever think of. It's an opportunity to enhance synergies between different sectors. So it's an opportunity to maximize the social, economic, and environmental benefits in ongoing projects. So I like the fact that this UN study emphasizes the opportunity aspect, and I like the fact that this conference is a good opportunity for us to think and say, how can we as engineers or as innovators or as lawyers, as policymakers, how can we maximize the opportunities of climate change rather than focus on the risk alone? So in climate proofing, as I've just mentioned, it's a multi-dimensional process. Whether you're talking about engineering, technology, architecture, design, urban planning, law, public policy, climate science, chemical engineering. It's an opportunity for a multi-stakeholder approach for everyone to come together and say, how can we identify the risk and opportunities of climate change? And I identify 4 important things. Number 1 is to map out and understand the present and future risk of climate change. So I identify what could happen within the next 50 to 100 years to our existing infrastructure. What are the risks that climate change could bring? Without understanding the risk, it will be difficult to prepare. So there is a need for events like this or for discussions like this through which stakeholders can map out what are the unique effects. The effects of climate change in Qatar is going to be different from the effects of climate change in Canada or in the US or in New Zealand. So what are the unique risks for Qatar when it comes to climate change and when it comes to existing infrastructure? Number 2 is the need to understand the key systems in the country that must be specifically protected. And this is very funny because I recall that when I was living in Canada, it could snow for 3 days and all the cars will be moving. There's no problem. You know, everyone is enjoying, no problem. But I recall that in England, if it snows for just 3 hours, the schools are shut down, and then everyone is panicking. The airport closes because everyone says the snow is too much. And that's how climate change would affect each country as well. So there is a need to understand the uniqueness to each country, because what country A can withstand, country B might not be able to withstand it. So there's a need to understand the critical systems that are essential and that must be protected. Number 3, there is a need, again, to understand the types of disruptions that cannot be accepted. In this country, for example, there's a need to specifically study how water infrastructure can be protected. You know, water infrastructure, food infrastructure, those are unique and very important for this country so that we can ensure that the impacts of climate change to this infrastructure can be anticipated and protected. Again, there will be a need to then adopt this integrated approach that talks of both structural changes and non-structural changes. Of course, non-structural changes are things that are much more like policy related. How can we have research and assessment, public awareness, such as this fantastic one that we're having right now? These are non-structural changes. They are things that can sensitize people and make everyone aware, whether it's upgrading building codes, land use planning, laws, and enforcement. Then, of course, when it comes to the structural measures, that's where engineers will come into, will be very helpful to help us understand what are the new designs that can help us, prepare in advance for climate change. For example, do we need ocean wave barriers? That's in countries where flooding will be a serious problem due to climate change. Do we need earthquake-resistant construction, evacuation shelters? These are all structural things that have to be designed and put in place well in advance. In terms of the way forward, an ongoing international approach is the need to design a policy strategy, a green, low-emission, and climate-resilient development strategy for Qatar. It will be fantastic if professional bodies such as the Qatar Society of Engineers can sort of create a platform for that integrated assessment, which would include technical, economic, and policy assessment of what a green, low-emission, and climate-resistant strategy could be for the country. And this is an approach that the UN has been conversing for quite a while, saying professionals in the engineering fields can help us sort of come together and have that comprehensive assessment of this green LECRD strategy. And this strategy will be important because, again, it will give us an opportunity to prevent and anticipate the risk while also creating opportunities for economic growth. Because the key concern in every country is, while climate proofing and while preventing the impact of climate change, how can we also create economic opportunities? Like I said, and I was very happy to see the exhibition with people talking about green jobs, green buildings, green certifications. Those are the opportunities that can be created by thinking about climate change while we prevent the risk as well. Well, so in conclusion, I think having a very comprehensive green LECRD strategy, which is integrated, which is multidimensional, taking into consideration perspectives from scientists and engineers, and perspectives from non-engineers like lawyers, policymakers, climate analysts. If we have that comprehensive approach, it could give us the opportunity to accentuate the opportunities that climate change brings and to reduce the risk that it brings. And I look forward to discussing that multidimensional approach with all of you. Thank you.